Welcome back to RFL, and my thanks to our panel tonight, Shelley Mayer, Noam Bramson, and Dominic Carter. As we shift gears now to talk about New York City's pension system, it is strapped. New York Times reporter Mary Williams Walsh co-authored a report on city pensions. She says the pension gap is getting wider in part because retirees are living longer, but also because of the way the city's pension funds are managed, as well as political interests. I spoke with Mary Williams Walsh earlier this week. Mary, in your report in the Times, you noted that in 2000, the city spent 2% of its budget on pensions, and next year it's set to spend 11% of its total budget on pensions. Is there any reason to think that that number doesn't continue to increase as we go forward?
I think what's going on is, in the past, not enough money was sometimes put into the fund every year, and so they are catching up they're sort of trying to backfill a hole. And they're doing that also at a time when a lot of people are retiring. I mean, we have this bulge in the population now, people who are in their 50s and 60s, and they're entitled to retire and take their benefits. And you have to get ready for that. You really do have to have a lot of money set aside so that you can stay liquid while they're retiring.
And the more money that New York City spends on its pension system, that means less money that's available to spend on things that we see and interact with every day, correct?
Yeah, and that's true everywhere. New York City, we're lucky in a way because we have a financially strong city with a growing population, and lots of businesses are still here. It wasn't always that way in New York City, though. If there's people around who still remember what was going on in the 1970s, and they think about that as they look at these numbers and think, you know, do we have enough money set aside?
In your report, you seem to highlight two main causes for the incredible increase in pension costs for the city. One being a rise of the obligations to workers, how much money that the city is going to have to give to its workers, and also the political confusion about pension oversight, correct?
Yeah, there's a lot of, I've been surprised as I've written about this how much it's driven by sort of outmoded accounting. The accounting for these plans shows that they're stronger than they probably really are if you were calculating it the way an economist would. So it looks like we can afford this and we can afford this, and then everybody says, okay, we don't have to worry about that, let's just keep going. If you look at the way it's calculated by the New York City's actuary, I mean, our own official guy who's responsible for the numbers, he says it's only about, like, maybe in the 40% funded, which isn't really enough. You shouldn't be going into the retirement of the baby boom in that shape.
And what drives that differing in reporting? There's some politics involved here too, including city officials and even state officials that seem to have a vested interest in not making that number sound too large. Yeah, you're delivering benefits that are fixed. New York really, really does have to pay that. You can't get out 10 years in the future and realize, oh, we promised too much, we're not going to pay that after all. Once they've earned it, you have to pay it. So you're sort of looking at a situation where you should stop and probably take stock and say, can we really afford this plan? And maybe everybody would decide, yes, we can, but that conversation just never happens. And the system, there are currently 5 different funds that govern the New York City pension system, with 5 different boards of trustees and 5 different sets of people trying to get input on how that money's invested and where. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's hard to keep track of, and if you're trying to present to the boards of trustees, you have to do 5 different presentations, 5 different votes. The voting can be very time-consuming. And on top of that, because of what happened in New York in the 1970s, there still is some state oversight. Like, the state legislature is the one who gets to vote on what income should we assume we're going to earn in the future from our investments, and that's a very, very important factor in this. It sort of dictates the cost of the plan, the way they're thinking about it. And to have Albany do that, to me, it's just kind of strange. Most places wouldn't do it that way. How accurate have those estimates been on how much the pension funds are going to earn in interest? This is hugely controversial. It sort of depends on what you take as your starting point. If you go back to 2000 and look at what we've earned to date, they haven't really made what they were anticipating they were going to earn. So if you say, okay, you said you were going to make 8% or whatever, and you only made 5%, and that's a loss. The first thing anybody will say is, oh no, you have to count the 1990s too. And then if you include investment gains from then, we had a stock market boom going on, and so then it looks like, oh, well, there's no problem, we made our assumptions. Probably what you should do is take a time frame that matches the average remaining working years of your whole workforce, which would be like about 12 to 15 years probably about 12 years. So if you went back to 2000, that would, I think, be appropriate. But it's hugely controversial because then you look like you have a huge loss and you're backfilling a big hole.
And as you note in the report, there are about 100 union deals that the city still has to work out that will all impact the obligations, because that's a factor in the negotiations with each of those unions. Mary, before I let you go, I'm just curious, is there any talk in what you've heard from your reporting about serious reforms to the process, either streamlining those 5 different oversight panels for these pension funds or coming up with another option for city workers besides a pension?
Yeah, this is a timely question now because we've got a new mayor and a new controller. They're both on the board. There's a new chief investment officer for the fund, and in the fall the actuary is going to retire, so there'll be a new actuary, and those are all very, very important people with a lot to say about this plan. So they could do one, but you can't tell yet because the whole change hasn't happened. But in the Bloomberg administration, they did try to do that, and it just sort of fizzled out. They didn't succeed. They did try to restructure the whole thing, and there was actually quite a bit of support for doing that.
And certainly a politically sensitive topic, to say the least. Mary Williams Walsh with the New York Times, thank you so much for your reporting on this subject and for a few minutes today.
Thank you.
Some Hudson Valley headlines next after a quick break.